Samuel Price had always cherished the serene solitude of his lakeside estate. A former entrepreneur who traded the hectic pace of city life for the calming embrace of nature, Samuel built his sanctuary around a private lake that shimmered like liquid silver in the early morning light. His sprawling property, nestled among stately pines and gently rolling hills, was more than just land and water. It was a legacy, a haven where family memories were woven into every ripple on the lake's surface and every warm sunset over the dock. Every weekend, Samuel strolled along a winding path that circled his lake, savoring the sight of water gently lapping at the weathered boathouse and listening to the quiet symphony of chirping crickets. This lake was his pride, a place of uninterrupted freedom where he could fish, relax, and reflect away from the clamor of modern life. It was his private retreat, safeguarded by nature and nurtured with his own hands. But one sweltering summer afternoon, that tranquility was shattered. Samuel, emerging from a refreshing dip in his beloved lake, was startled to see a raucous crowd gathering on the far shore. Colorful inflatables bobbed alongside makeshift decorations, and the distant sounds of boisterous laughter and music grew louder by the minute. With mounting disbelief, Samuel realized that Kerren Leland, the imperious president of the local homeowners association known for her relentless drive for uniformity, had taken it upon herself to host a pool party on his private lake. Kerren, always impeccably dressed and exuding self-importance, had transformed Samuel's secluded oasis into her personal playground. Without any invitation or regard for Samuel's property rights, she'd organized a lavish party with her friends and even some HOA board members, turning his sacred retreat into a raucous public spectacle. Shocked and indignant, Samuel felt his heart sink. His lake had always been his alone, a private paradise where nature and family reigned supreme. That evening, as the last of the party's revelry echoed faintly across the water, Samuel stood on his dock, the cool night air contrasting sharply with his inner turmoil. Determined to confront this breach of his privacy and to reclaim his sanctuary, he knew a showdown with Kerren was inevitable. With quiet resolve, Samuel vowed that he would not allow Kerren's reckless intrusion to go unchallenged. His mind raced with ideas on how to turn the tables and send a message that personal property and freedom were not for sale to arbitrary HOA dictates. The next morning, Samuel awoke to a sight that further confirmed his worst fears. Taped to the oak door of his lakeside cottage was a thick, embossed envelope bearing the official seal of the HOA. With a heavy heart, Samuel opened it to find a formal notice demanding a fine of $1,000 for unauthorized use of private property and disruption of community aesthetics. The citation explicitly referenced the previous day's pool party, a blatant intrusion on his personal lake. Before Samuel could fully process the notice, there came a sharp knock on his door. Opening it, he found Kerren standing on his stoop, dressed in a perfectly tailored power suit and donning her trademark oversized sunglasses. She exuded an air of unyielding authority. Her smile was tight and condescending as she greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Price. I trust you've received our notice. Our community standards must be upheld, regardless of personal claims." Samuel's eyes narrowed as he held the notice. "Kerren, my lake is private property. I never invited anyone here, and your party was an unauthorized invasion of my sanctuary. This fine is completely baseless." Kerren's tone was icy. "The rules apply to every homeowner. Even if your lake is private, events like these affect the overall image of our neighborhood. I expect you to rectify the situation immediately, or further action will be taken." Determined not to be cowed, Samuel replied, "I've consulted with local zoning officials. They confirm that my rights to enjoy my private lake are fully protected by law. Your notice is nothing more than an attempt to enforce conformity through intimidation." As if to reinforce her threat, Kerren informed him that inspectors would be arriving later that day to assess his property for further noncompliance. Within a short while, a nondescript van emblazoned with the HOA emblem pulled up the gravel driveway. A team of inspectors, clipboards in hand, descended and began a meticulous examination of his property, measuring the lake's boundary, scrutinizing the landscaping, and even collecting water samples. Samuel watched from behind curtained windows, documenting every moment with his own camera. His phone buzzed with messages from concerned neighbors, and whispers spread that Kerren's tactics were notorious. Her finds were less about community upkeep and more about control. That evening, as the inspectors departed and Kerren left with a final curt nod, Samuel sat on his porch, the fine clutched in his hand. He resolved that he would challenge this unjust fine and expose the overreach of an HOA that sought to regulate even the most personal of spaces. Every detail, the intrusive inspection, Kerren's smug demeanor, and the arbitrary nature of the fine, would be used to fight back. In the quiet twilight, with the lake whispering its timeless secrets, Samuel vowed to defend his rights and reclaim his sanctuary from Kerren's dictatorial grasp. In the days following the fine and intrusive inspection, Kerren Leland's tactics escalated sharply. Samuel began to notice an onslaught of violation notices appearing not only on his door, but on those of several neighbors. One envelope accused him of misappropriation of private property aesthetics, while another warned that his failure to prevent unauthorized aquatic gatherings would lead to severe penalties. It was clear that Kerren was not merely content with issuing fines. She was determined to intimidate every homeowner into submission. Samuel's suspicions grew as he started digging deeper into the HOA's records. Late one evening, he pored over old meeting minutes, financial ledgers, and internal emails. What he uncovered was deeply troubling. Kerren and her cronies had a long history of fabricating violations and imposing fines that were then funneled into a mysterious community fund, with no transparent accounting. Rumors circulated among neighbors that even trivial infractions were exploited to line the pockets of those in power. During a quiet conversation at a local cafe, a longtime resident confided, "Kerren's fines are a tool for control. I've heard stories of board members pocketing money from these fines, and no one dares speak out." Samuel's heart pounded with both anger and determination. This wasn't merely about his private lake. It was about a system designed to enforce uniformity by any means necessary. Armed with mounting evidence, Samuel repositioned his security cameras to capture not only public areas of his property, but also any clandestine meetings among HOA board members. One late night, as he reviewed hours of footage, he caught a glimpse of a heated exchange between two board members in a dimly lit back office of the HOA headquarters. Their hushed voices and furtive gestures confirmed his suspicions. Even insiders were beginning to question Kerren's increasingly arbitrary measures. At the next HOA meeting, held in a drab community center lit by harsh fluorescent lights, Samuel took a stand. Clutching a thick folder filled with photographs, copies of violation notices, and excerpts from internal communications, he addressed the tense audience. What we're witnessing is not about preserving community standards. It's about enforcing conformity for profit and power. My private lake, invaded by an uninvited party, is just one example of the abuses we all endure under Kerren's regime. A heavy silence fell as Samuel's evidence was laid before the assembled homeowners. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, while a few residents nodded in quiet agreement. Kerren, however, maintained a steely glare. "Mr. Price, your interpretation is misguided. Our rules are clear and apply to everyone. If you have concerns, you should follow proper channels instead of stirring dissent." But Samuel pressed on, "I have the support of local zoning officials, and my evidence shows a clear pattern of abuse, not just against me, but against every homeowner who values their privacy and property rights. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about power and control." As murmurs of discontent and solidarity rippled through the room, Samuel realized that the seed of rebellion had been planted. The community was beginning to see the HOA for what it was, a tool of oppression wielded by one woman's obsessive desire for order. With his dossier growing and his resolve hardening, Samuel prepared for the inevitable showdown that would expose the corruption at the heart of the HOA. Tensions reached a critical boiling point one blazing afternoon when Kerren decided to push her campaign of intimidation even further. Claiming that Samuel's failure to secure his private lake was causing a public disturbance and endangering the neighborhood's image, she dispatched a team of HOA inspectors once again. This time, they arrived in force, armed with clipboards and stern expressions, determined to document every perceived violation. Samuel, witnessing the intrusive inspection from his veranda, felt his anger rise. "My lake is my sanctuary," he shouted as he confronted the inspectors. "This isn't a public pool, it's my private property, and I will not have it turned into a stage for your arbitrary rules." Amid the chaos, a daring idea sparked in Samuel's mind. If Kerren was so intent on controlling every inch of his property, then it was time to send a message that no one could tame what was rightfully his. That very evening, as the inspectors left and Kerren seethed with frustration, Samuel began his counterstrike. He gathered a large batch of brightly colored, inflatable rubber snakes, humorous yet unmistakably menacing, and strategically deployed them across the surface of his lake. Floating atop the water, the snakes formed a bizarre, undulating barrier that was both playful and symbolic, a protest against the invasive pool party that had marred his privacy. The next morning, when Kerren returned with a fresh batch of violation notices and inspectors in tow, she was met with an astonishing sight. The once pristine surface of Samuel's private lake was now dotted with an array of floating rubber snakes. Their bright colors bobbed and writhed in the gentle morning current, creating an eerie, reptilian spectacle that immediately disrupted the conventional beauty of the lake. Kerren's face paled as the floating snakes became the center of attention. "Mr. Price, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Samuel's eyes sparkled with quiet triumph. "I'm sending you a message, Kerren. My lake is not your playground for misguided pool parties or your instrument for enforcing conformity. It's my private sanctuary, and I will protect it in every way possible." Hidden cameras captured every moment of the unfolding spectacle. Kerren's flustered attempts to regain control, her futile scolding of the inspectors, and the shocked murmurs of neighbors witnessing the colorful protest. The rubber snakes, floating innocently on the water, had become a potent symbol of defiance, a living, buoyant rebuke to Kerren's overreach. The incident ignited a wave of support among the community. Neighbors began sharing their own stories of arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections. At informal gatherings and over backyard fences, residents expressed their solidarity with Samuel, and the playful image of a lake teeming with rubber snakes became a rallying cry against the HOA's authoritarian tactics. That day, as Kerren departed in a huff and the inspectors left with puzzled expressions, Samuel knew that he had struck a decisive blow. The act of transforming his private lake into a floating art installation was not only a personal victory. It was a public declaration that no amount of bureaucratic control could suppress individual freedom. With the community now firmly on his side, Samuel prepared for the next stage in his battle against Kerren's oppressive regime. Facing a rising tide of dissent and humiliation, Kerren Leland became increasingly desperate to reclaim her dwindling authority. Early one misty morning, determined to deliver a final blow to Samuel's defiance, she orchestrated a surprise raid on his property. Kerren arrived at Samuel's lake in her sleek black sedan, flanked by two burly HOA enforcers and clutching a thick folder of legal documents that she claimed would restore order to the community. "Mr. Price," she barked as she stepped onto the dock, "your persistent disregard for our community standards leaves me no choice. I am here to enforce compliance. You must remove these contrivances from your lake immediately or face further legal action." Her tone was icy and unyielding, a last desperate attempt to reassert control over her territory. Samuel, ever calm yet resolute, stepped forward. "Kerren, you've crossed every boundary. My lake is my private property, and your interference is nothing short of harassment. I have documented every violation, every unauthorized event, and every instance of your overreach. Today, you will have to answer for your actions." As Kerren advanced toward the dock, her enforcers moved to confiscate the floating rubber snakes, symbols of Samuel's resistance. In that tense moment, Samuel activated his remote control system. With a swift click, he locked the access panel on his security system, ensuring that no further tampering could occur. The floating snakes remained, a vivid emblem of defiance. Kerren's face contorted with rage as she saw her carefully orchestrated plan begin to crumble. "This is unacceptable," she shouted. "I am calling the police. This is a public disturbance and a blatant violation of community standards." Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, and uniformed officers arrived on the scene. Samuel calmly presented his evidence, video footage from his hidden cameras capturing Kerren's unyielding intrusion and the subsequent chaos among her enforcers. The police listened, their expressions growing increasingly skeptical of Kerren's narrative as they reviewed the recordings. Caught red-handed on camera and confronted by an enraged crowd of supportive neighbors, Kerren's desperate attempt to seize control unraveled before her eyes. "This isn't over," she spat as she was led away by the officers, her voice lost amid the murmurs of vindication from the assembled community. The raid had been her final, desperate move, a move that not only failed to intimidate Samuel, but instead galvanized the residents further. Every document, every piece of video evidence, was now a weapon in Samuel's arsenal against the tyranny of an HOA that sought to dictate every aspect of personal life. In the aftermath of Kerren's failed raid, the community's collective outrage reached a fever pitch. Homeowners, who had long suffered under the arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections, convened at an emergency town hall meeting in the local community center. The atmosphere was charged with determination, and every attendee had a story of Kerren's overreach to share. Samuel took the stage once more, this time with an even larger dossier of evidence, video recordings of the pool party, the subsequent fine notice, the intrusive inspections, and the dramatic raid. With each piece of evidence laid before the assembly, the case against Kerren became undeniable. Neighbors recounted how Kerren's actions had not only infringed on their privacy, but had also drained their hard-earned money through baseless fines. After hours of impassioned testimonies and deliberations, the homeowners voted overwhelmingly to expel Kerren from the HOA board. The vote was a resounding declaration. No single individual would be allowed to impose her narrow view of perfection on an entire community. Local media quickly picked up the story, and headlines heralded the fall of Kerren Leland as a victory for property rights and personal freedom. Within days, the remaining board members resigned en masse, and an independent audit was ordered to recover misappropriated funds and reform HOA practices. At a celebratory gathering on Samuel's lakefront, the mood was one of jubilation and relief. Neighbors shared stories of past grievances and toasted to a future free from arbitrary control. The once oppressive shadow of the HOA had finally lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of autonomy and community spirit. Samuel, watching the party from his dock, allowed himself a quiet smile, a smile that carried the weight of hard-won justice. In the wake of Kerren's dramatic expulsion, the legal consequences for the HOA were swift and severe. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the community, alleging mismanagement, fraudulent fines, and systematic abuse of power under Kerren's leadership. Samuel's comprehensive dossier, meticulously compiled over months of documentation, formed the cornerstone of the case. During a tense courtroom session, one by one, homeowners testified about the countless arbitrary fines and invasive inspections that had marred their lives. Samuel presented video evidence of the pool party, the subsequent violation notices, and even the dramatic footage of Kerren's attempted raid. The judge, moved by the overwhelming evidence, declared, "This court finds that the HOA, under the direction of Kerren Leland, has egregiously violated the rights of its members. The HOA is hereby fined and ordered to undergo a complete structural and procedural overhaul." Local authorities pledged to increase oversight of community associations, ensuring that no homeowner would again be subject to such oppressive measures. The ruling sent shockwaves through the region and marked a turning point, a moment when the voices of individual property owners triumphed over bureaucratic tyranny. Samuel, standing amidst supportive neighbors outside the courthouse, felt a deep sense of vindication. The legal verdict not only confirmed that his rights had been upheld, but also signaled the dismantling of an exploitative system. It was a resounding affirmation that personal freedom and private property would always come before the unchecked power of an overzealous HOA. With the legal and public judgments rendered against her, Kerren Leland's personal life began to unravel in spectacular fashion. Once the unchallenged enforcer of HOA standards, Kerren now found herself at the center of a scandal that was broadcast on local news and splashed across social media. Her once impeccable image was tarnished by repeated footage of her humiliating attempts to seize control, footage that the community replayed with wry amusement and schadenfreude. The lavish lifestyle Kerren had once flaunted, designer clothes, luxury cars, and an aura of untouchability, crumbled as creditors started knocking and foreclosure notices arrived. Former allies distanced themselves, and board members, now under investigation, were quick to sever ties with the fallen enforcer. In a final bitter twist of fate, Kerren was forced to accept a modest position as an assistant property manager for a small, struggling HOA in a neighboring town, a role that left no room for the power and authority she had once wielded so arrogantly. One crisp morning, as Samuel tended to his peaceful lake, he spotted Kerren leaving her new, unassuming office building. Exchanging a knowing look with a neighbor, Samuel couldn't help but murmur with quiet satisfaction, "I hope you enjoy following orders, Kerren." Her once dominant presence was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a living reminder that unchecked power eventually invites accountability. In the months that followed, the oppressive reign of Kerren Leland faded into a distant memory, replaced by a vibrant, self-reliant community. Samuel Price's private lake, once invaded by a raunchy pool party, had been restored to its original tranquil beauty. The floating rubber snakes, though eventually removed, remained etched in the community's collective memory as a symbol of resistance, a playful yet defiant gesture against authoritarian overreach. At a sunlit neighborhood barbecue held on the banks of Samuel's Lake, residents gathered to celebrate their regained freedom. Laughter mingled with the gentle lapping of water against the dock as neighbors recounted their tales of hardship and ultimate victory. In a final moment of light-hearted rebellion, one neighbor produced a humorous violation notice for excessive aquatic whimsy and handed it to Samuel with a wink. Samuel, with a satisfied smile and eyes twinkling with mischief, raised the faux citation and declared, "They really tried, but in the end, our community's spirit will never be contained." His words, resonating with warmth and defiant joy, were met with cheers and applause from every corner of the gathering. As twilight descended and the stars emerged to cast their gentle glow over the reclaimed lake, Samuel sat quietly on his favorite dock. He gazed out over the shimmering water, a peaceful, private haven now free from the tyranny of arbitrary rules. In that serene moment, with a soft murmur of his neighbors and the echo of their laughter in the air, it was clear that while tyrants may rise and fall, the true spirit of community endures forever. Fade to black.